The rise of both women doctors and medical schools did not just end at the turn of and into the 20th century, but they went into decline. Dr. Reba Lloyd, the first woman doctor to open a practice in Bridgeton, New Jersey, found herself in the middle of this transitional period, educated during the growth and working during the decrease of women doctors. On June 7, 1867, Reba Lloyd was born in Mannington Township in Salem, New Jersey, to Parvin Lloyd, a farmer, and Rebecca Lloyd, a housekeeper. Lloyd was Parvin and Rebecca's fifth and last child. Her siblings from oldest were Henry R., Ella B., Edward C., and Parvin Jr. Lloyd attended the Friends School in Woodstown, and by 16 had completed her education and was teaching. In 1898, at roughly 31, Lloyd graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, becoming Dr. Reba Lloyd, M.D., specializing in nervous disorders. Nervous disorders was an umbrella term for many different types of 19th century medical conditions that led to fatigue, nervousness, impotence, etc. One example of the 19th century disorder was called neurasthenia, and that's how it's spelled in case I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Also known as nervous exhaustion. This disorder was believed to stem from exhaustion of one's nerves, and the symptoms consisted of anxiety, depression, headaches, impotence, insomnia, irritability, lethargy, muscle pain, and weight loss. Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania was a Quaker college that only accepted women as students. All women were welcome and accepted, regardless of race. In addition to being a strictly women's college, the college also welcomed women and former students to join their faculty. Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania opened in 1850 and was the second college in the world that accepted and trained women to become medical doctors, the first being in Boston. Originally, the college was named the Female Medical School of Pennsylvania before becoming the Women's Medical College in 1867. The Women's Medical College remained a women's college until 1970, when it became a co-ed and college again was renamed to the Medical College of Pennsylvania. In 1993, the school merged with the Hahnemann Medical School, and for the final time, in 2003, it merged with Drexel University College of Medicine. After graduating from medical school, Lloyd ran a maternity hospital in Philadelphia, before returning to South Jersey and opening up a practice in Bridgeton on 20 Bank Street in Bridgeton in September of 1898. Lloyd's practice moved around a couple times, from 20 Bank Street to 77 North Pearl Street in 1903, and then to 68 North Pearl Street around 1906, and finally to 117 Atlantic Street in 1909. Lloyd's Hospital on Atlantic Street operated under her care until August of 1919. Lloyd's education did not end at her graduation. In 1915, 17 years after graduating from medical school, Lloyd traveled to Long Island Hospital in New York to study twilight sleep from Dr. John Pollock, who had studied the process abroad. Twilight sleep originated in Germany and was used during childbirth. It was described as putting the woman into a trance-like state, which caused her to somewhat react to the pain, but ultimately not remember the feeling of childbirth. This was done by administering an injection of a mix of morphine, which was like a pain medicine, and a scopolamine, which was described as like a zombie medicine where it put her in kind of a fog. There are some great examples of this in popular entertainment. In Mad Men, when one of the characters named Betty is having her youngest child, she goes into this sleep-like state where she sees her father who has passed. And then in Outlander, when Claire has her youngest child, she fights with the doctor to not put her under because she wanted to feel the pain of childbirth. And the doctors, not too surprisingly, ignore her. Once Lloyd learned the method of twilight sleep, she adopted it in her hospital, making it arguable that treatment from Dr. Lloyd's office was up to date and that she, like many of her contemporaries, continued to educate herself after earning her medical degree. In 1917, Lloyd purchased the former Ivy Hall Seminary. Ivy Hall Seminary was an all-girls school, previously known as Bridgeton Female Seminary and also known as Family and Day School for Young Ladies. The school opened in 1861 by Margarita Shepherd. When Lloyd purchased the school, she kept the name but changed seminary to sanitarium, making it the Ivy Hall Sanitarium. Here's news of it opening, of her purchasing the property on November 13, 1917, in the Bridgeton Evening News. And then it opening only a couple weeks later. Originally, Lloyd planned to sell her Atlantic Street Hospital after purchasing the former school, but decided to keep it due to overflow before eventually selling it 2 years later in 1919 to another women's medical college alumna, Dr. Berta Walland of Philadelphia. It is really interesting that she sold it to another alumna of the women's medical school, someone she may have known herself through the college. Women doctors were not a monolithic group that agreed on everything. Some women saw the value in separation of doctors based on gender and created practices and publications in which only women doctors worked and submitted authored research to. Other women saw it as beneficial to work with men doctors and detrimental to their work to be separated. And here's a list of doctors that got together and decided that they wanted to raise the price of their home visits. And highlighted is Dr. Lloyd, and then you see all these other doctors. You have Alfred Cornwell, W. Leslie Cornwell, M.K. Elmer, J.C. Loper. Dr. Reba Lloyd worked with men and women doctors. That could have been because of the limited number of women doctors in Bridgeton, or because she wanted to work with men doctors. The exact answer is unknown. At Ivy Hall Sanitarium, Lloyd's patients suffered from many types of ailments and illnesses. The Journey of the Medical Society of New Jersey on August 22nd described Ivy Hall Sanitarium as being, quote, for the care of the invalid, aged, neurasthenic, and all cases requiring rest, hygienic, scientific, and dietetic treatments, end quote. They also offered massages, hydrotherapy, and electrotherapy. Treatment administered and births handled by Lloyd were sometimes published in Bridgeton newspapers. While her patients' records are either lost or still yet to be uncovered, it is nearly impossible to determine if the 172 patients listed in the Bridgeton newspapers from 1900 to 1922 listed as treated by Lloyd between those dates were the total of her patients. And here's just a list of a few of them that were listed in the Bridgeton Evening News on January 3rd, 1919. On December 25th, you have Howard Scott Carl to Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth B. Carl at the Dr. Reba Lloyd Maternity Hospital, so that was probably at the Atlantic Hospital. Down here you have Josephine Compton Steelman to Mr. and Mrs. Albert T. Steelman of Port Norris at the Dr. Reba Lloyd Maternity. Son to Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Ridgway of Hancock's Bridge at Dr. Reba Lloyd Maternity. So she treated people from all over this area. Of the 172 patients listed between 1900 to 1922, the majority of them saw Lloyd for tonsil and adenoid surgeries or childbirth. Here's we already went over the list of this childbirths. She handled that were listed in the Bridgeton Evening News. Lloyd also did house calls and was called alongside men doctors during emergency incidents that needed doctors on location immediately. So here's an example of one. That Miss Elsie Cart is alive today is due entirely to the earnest profession of doctors Reba Lloyd and S.M. Wilson. Elsie was determined to die, giving as an excuse that she was tired of living. The woman gulped down an entire bottle of laudanum and fought those who endeavored to save her. It was a longer report, and the newspaper didn't seem to be much feeling or sympathy towards Elsie Cart. So this, 1900. Another example, it was in 1901 when Lloyd and Dr. M.K. Elmer were called when Mrs. Amelia Ott broke her arm. So in North Bridgeton met with serious accident. She started to go down in the cellar to take several glass jars which she had in her arms. Making a misstep, she fell headlong from the top steps and pitched down to the floor. Her left arm was broken in 3 places and her right arm was seriously sprained. The broken jars cut her face considerably. Doctors M.K. Elmer and Reba Lloyd responded to a hurried summons, and the broken arm was attended to. Sunday, the bandages were obliged to be removed and the arm giving further attention. Dr. Reba Lloyd's profession did not prevent her from having a family, and her family did not affect her professional work. The early 20th century idea of feminism was the belief that women can have it all, a career and a family, and Lloyd lived out that understanding of feminism. On March 22, 1906, Lloyd married machinist Charles E. Kump, originally of Hanover, Pennsylvania, and became Dr. Reba Lloyd Kump. The Bridgeton Evening News reported that the wedding did not interfere with her professional duties as she saw the office patients yesterday and made her calls as usual. And it said Wednesday, since she will be in her office again on next Wednesday and will continue her practice. Kump also later got involved with Lloyd's work, becoming the supervisor of Ivy Hall Sanitarium under Lloyd. While she was the breadwinner, the census records still report him as the head of the household, perpetuating the societal norm that men, no matter their income compared to their wives, were always the head. Together, Lloyd and Kump had 2 children, Julia, who was born in 1908, and Albert, who was born a year later in 1909. Albert followed in his mother's footsteps and became a doctor. While both a wife and a mother, Lloyd opened both Atlantic Street Hospital and Ivy Hall Sanitarium, and at one point practiced at both hospitals. How her work affected her family and private life is unknown, but it did anything but slow her down in participating in the suffrage movement and other social activities, and in addition to her work. Upon first returning to South Jersey, she joined the Central Methodist Episcopal Church and became an officer of their Christian Endeavor Society. The Christian Endeavor Society was and is a non-denominational organization in which its members support one another in living upright lives and do different types of outreach programs for the community. Lloyd also was invited to become a member of the Cumberland County Medical Society, and at one time was the only woman doctor to be a member. Her involvement in the Medical Society earned her the role of president of the Cumberland County Medical Society. In addition to her presidency of the County Medical Society, she also served as president of the Board of Health. Dr. Mary Dunlap, I believe, was the first of Vineland, New Jersey, who worked in Vineland, was the first woman member of the Cumberland County Medical Society. Lloyd, like many late 19th and early 20th century women doctors, were involved in local suffragist organizations. Lloyd served as an officer for the Bridgeton Equal Suffrage League, that was run by Oberlin Smith of the Theracute Machine Company. Later, the Bridgeton Suffrage Association formed, in which Lloyd also served as an officer. It was anything but uncommon for women doctors to be involved in early forms of feminist movements, but it was also not uncommon for women doctors to not be supportive be supportive of suffrage activities. In 1929, while running Ivy Hall Sanitarium and being involved in the community, Lloyd purchased the Judge John S. Wood Colonial Mansion in Stow Creek and named it Ivy Manor. Ivy Manor was a retreat getaway slash hotel of sorts. So there's some rooms. So we have a dining room, a bedroom, like a parlor, a hallway, and then another room, and it appears like that's like the bathroom of sorts. You could book a room and also purchase a dinner. So here's the typical menus listed for 65 cents. Got soups, this one was cream chicken, new potatoes, asparagus butter, coffee or tea, rolls, ice cream, and $1 dinner was choice of soups, half-boiled or fried chicken, new potatoes, asparagus, coleslaw, cranberry jelly, rolls and butter, cake and ice cream, coffee or tea. While Ivy Manor was not a hospital or a place for medical treatment, the sentiment was the same in that it was a place in which people could go for mental and physical rejuvenation, which makes sense due to Lloyd's background in nervous disorders, which sometimes called for rest. In a pamphlet written by Lloyd on Ivy Manor, she wrote, quote, "So many places at Ivy Manor invite rest that one falls easily into healthful relaxation. Ivy Manor was created for and was achieved rest." Lloyd used rest multiple times throughout the booklet, and even went as far as having an image of a key when you first enter the booklet that says, "The key to Ivy Manor, what comfort, joy, and blessed rest it can unlock." Like I said, while Ivy Manor was not a hospital nor a doctor's office, Lloyd did see it as an institution in which people who could pay were able to get rest, and which was necessary for their overall health. Today, the Ivy Hall Manor is the Woodland Country Day School. While Lloyd graduated in 1898, she practiced in the early 20th century at a time when the number of women doctors began to dwindle. The decrease of women doctors was due to a number of reasons that historian Regina Morens Sanchez argued consisted of the standardization of medical schools, medical college becoming co-ed, and the raising of tuition prices. The integration of men's students into women medical schools was not done in spite of women students. Many young women who had not experienced the same type of sexism that early generations had faced wanted to attend co-ed colleges, and even went as far as rejecting medical organizations, such as the American Women's Association, that were restricted for women, that was restricted just for women doctors only. The young women doctors wanted to work and learn alongside men doctors, and did not want to separate themselves. These tensions were linked sometimes to generational divide and how each group had experienced sexism within the medical field. In the late 19th century, women, the experiences they felt in medical schools was harassment. Men would sometimes yell at them. So the institutional racism within the medical field changed as within moving into the 20th century. This is not to say sexism no longer existed within the medical field and schools. Sexism was still a reality that many women students had to deal with from their fellow students. And women faced it after graduating and were limited in their opportunities due to the fact that not every medical practice or hospital would accept a woman doctor. And this was also linked to racism as well. At one point in the late 19th century, there was a hospital in New York. They accepted a woman doctor, and once they found out she attended the facility, once they found out she was black, they asked her to step down, and that they could not accept her within the institution as a medical doctor. It is a little late date-wise, but you also see this type of sexism once again in popular culture. Masters of Sex is a great example. It was a show, and you can see this type of sexism with one of the characters who is a real person, Virginia Johnson. While she's attending medical school, her male students kind of undermine her, and then they're surprised when they learn she's almost better at her job or at doing the schoolwork because she has to work so hard to prove herself. And also, there was another doctor on the show, Dr. Leanne DePaul, who worked as in the realm of gynecology, and it was hard for her to retain patients because of the institutional sexism. And that while women were able to become educated, it was hard for them to get the same experiences outside of medical school as their male counterparts. The growth of co-ed programs with the diminishing of women-only programs did not play in the dwindling of women doctors due to the denying of admittance. Sometimes largely due to the threat of losing funds from large feminist donors, women were admitted with the same expectations and standards as men students were. So and that was another thing as well, is that women colleges sometimes struggled with gaining the same funding as institutions like Cornell and these larger male institutions. Yet while women were accepted as students at co-ed schools, they were largely not hired as faculty. The lack of women faculty was a lack of representation from the women students who looked around and saw only men, which sometimes inhibited some of them from reaching that true potential. Instead of feeling just as confident as their fellow men students, they struggled in understanding that they could have gone as far. While this is a broad generalization, and some women may not have felt this way, it was still a reality that many women did struggle with. And in addition to the students as well, one example is when the women's medical college in Pennsylvania closed, a lot of the women faculty also lost their jobs and struggled with further opportunities. In 1910, Carnegie's Foundation's publication printed Abraham Flexner's report on medical schools. Abraham Flexner was an educator who was involved in medical reform. The report evaluated medical schools, their educators, the level of curriculum, their current students, and the students that they admitted to the school. Flexner felt that the medical schools needed to be reformed and standardized due to them, in Regina Moran Sanchez's words, as, quote, accepting inferior students, provided meager or non-existent training in laboratory science and clinical medicine, and overproduced doctors, end quote. Flexner saw reform occurring by having universities take over medical schools, and again, in Sanchez's words, as needing, quote, preliminary education requirements and needed to be placed under the control of universities. Preliminary education requirements needed to be enforced, curricula needed to be lengthened, and laboratory facilities needed to be improved, end quotes. So historically, medical schools, you would go for about 4 years, and then you would get a lot of your other training outside of medical schools. You would try to find a doctor to work under. So a lot of your education, hands-on, was done also outside of the school as well. Medical schools were not standardized, and it was easy to complete and earn an MD. And he also viewed that because it was so easy, you had this almost like flooded market, I don't mean market, but this huge growth in number of doctors that were, and because you had so many, and it was so many to get through, they were ill-equipped and not doing justice for the patients. The Women's Medical College of Philadelphia was described by Flexner as possessing, quote, striking evidence of a genuine effort to do the best possible with limited resources, end quote. So he saw that they were doing pretty well with what they had to work with, which once again was hard for them compared to other colleges that had so much more funding. But ultimately, Flexner viewed the college as accomplishing the most if the college became co-ed and educated men as well. So it seems like there was this issue with women colleges. They wanted, it seemed to them to make more sense to have them working together. Another reasoning that played a role in the decline of the number of women doctors was due to the rising rate in tuition. 19th century medical schools were much more affordable than they would later become in the early 20th century. Lloyd was not uncommon. Coming from a working class household, many women worked to pay for college. For example, Dr. Eliza Anna Greer, who was formerly enslaved, graduated from the Women's Medical College in 1897. It took Greer 7 years to graduate due to her working every other year to pay for medical school. Many, like Lloyd, came from farming or working class families, and others worked to put themselves through school. For example, if a woman was a teacher, it was possible for her to pay to get herself through medical school. But the rising cost of medical school prevented many women and individuals from attending school. The shrinking number of women doctors wasn't due to one particular issue, but the overall change of medical schools and the field. Dr. Reba Lloyd died at Ivy Hall Sanitarium on April 14, 1940, due to chronic myocarditis, which is inflammation of the middle layer of the heart, and arthritis. She was 72 years old. Her funeral service was held at Ivy Hall Sanitarium, and she today is buried at Fernwood Memorial Park. After she passed, Ivy Hall Sanitarium changed hands. At one point it became a nursing home and remained in operation until the 70s. Next it became a restaurant before falling into bankruptcy sometime around the turn of the 21st century. The city of Bridgeton acquired the building and worked to restore the former hospital because of its historical significance. Today, the Castu Center of Rutgers University, a science information organization, uses the former Ivy Hall Sanitarium. Dr. Reba Lloyd trained and worked during this transitional period within the medical field in the United States, in which the number of women doctors in the medical field rose and went in decline. While being educated, she was still in the upswing of the number of women being educated or entering the field. Within the first couple years of her career, and the number of women becoming doctors and working in the field began to dwindle. Dr. Reba Lloyd was not an outlier, but similar to the many other women doctors working in the field, determining what worked best for her career and taking any opportunity to better her career. Overall, her practice in Bridgeton offered more opportunities for treatment to the citizens and connected Bridgeton to the larger history of the medical field, and in addition created institutions that were not once there and seemed to not exist after her passing.